Hello. Today I will be featuring a guide on IFHE because certain people have been making some very confusing statements to the community and encouraging the use of certain perks on ships that don't really benefit from them much at all. So for this sake I bought a Cleveland. As you can see, I do not have IFHE on this. This is just a normal Cleveland, pretty much no special perks, no nothing, and I will attempt to explain to you how IFHE works and how HE works and on which ships you should be using it. Now, to understand how IFHE works, we must first understand how HE works. Now, HE penetration in this game is calculated in a very simple manner. You split the AP penetration, or no, you split the caliber of the guns by 6 or by 4 in the case of German battleships, but let's not get into that right now. You split it by 6 and the value that you get is the penetration value of your HE penetration value. Now, in the case of the Cleveland, of course, when we split it, 152, we split it by 4, we get 25.333333 and so forth. So that means this decimal is rounded down to the nearest number, or rounded up to the nearest number, and in this case we get 25 millimeters of penetration. So 152 millimeter guns on the Cleveland does not penetrate 25 millimeter armor because the penetration is exactly 25 millimeters. So I'm shooting all these bows that are 25 millimeters thick, and you can see that my shells are just shattering because, once again, the penetration is the exact same value as the armor, so the armor withstands it and you get no penetration at all. And this is how basic HE works. Now, for example, something like the Mogami, who instead of 152 has 155 millimeter guns, when you split that in 6, you actually get 25.833, and because this is rounded to the nearest number, this becomes 26 millimeter penetration. So the Mogami can actually already penetrate 25 millimeters even without IFHE. So now that we understand how HE works, or how to calculate your HE penetration, we need to talk about HE itself. First of all, HE doesn't care about angles. HE doesn't give one shit about angle, distance, your shell velocity. It doesn't care about anything. The only thing the game calculates is the raw thickness of the armor compared to your HE penetration. That's the only thing that matters. You can be shooting from a 0.1 degree angle at any armor, as long as your HE penetration is higher than the armor value, you will be scoring a penetration and you will deal damage and so forth. Of course, shattered shells can still start fires, but that's not really relevant for this discussion. So you've been seeing me shooting all these bows, and as you can see, I'm just dealing 0 damage. My shells are shattering. So obviously, I will now take the very same captain and I will spec it into IFHE, just making a basic cruiser captain here, priority target, expert marksman, and let's get fire chance since it is a Cleveland. And now I will spec IFHE, and let's give it a second try. So to explain how IFHE works, we return to our old formula. We take the original we calculate the original penetration, aka we split the caliber by 6. And now we add 30% to it because IFHE increases your HE penetration by 30%. So the IFHE the HE penetration of the Cleveland, which was 25 millimeter, actually becomes 32.5 now, which is of course rounded up to 33 millimeters. So you can already see it in action. All these bows that were shattering my shells, all these bows that were pretty much unimpregnable, are now easily penetratable. Once again, it doesn't matter which angle I'm shooting from, it doesn't matter what distance I'm shooting from. Anyone who says anything about IFHE affecting penetration angles or anything about angling in HE in general, they don't really understand how game mechanics works, because angles have nothing to do with HE. HE doesn't give a shit. The only thing that matters are the two values, the thickness of the armor and your own HE penetration. And it doesn't even impact damage in any way either. You still deal exactly the same HE damage as before. And you can't penetrate things that you couldn't penetrate before. Now, for example, his hull is shattering my shells, and this is of course one of those cases where you get C penetrations but you don't deal any damage. The reason here is of course that I am penetrating his torpedo belt. So my HE shell hits the torpedo belt, explodes, and goes through it, which of course counts as a penetration. The shell doesn't shatter, but the HE damage is unable to penetrate through his actual citadel armor, his broadside armor that's behind it. The only thing I'm penetrating is the torpedo protection. So that's why you often get those penetrations that deal 0 damage in this example. Here of course I shoot someone who doesn't have this torpedo bulge, and as you can see I'm just getting straight up shatters with 0 damage. So IFHE of course has no effect here because his armor value is much higher than my penetration value, or my HE penetration value in this case. So now we know why I highly recommend using IFHE on the Cleveland. Let's move on. So now that you know yourself exactly how to calculate the HE penetration, you can check out yourself if you benefit from it. For example, the Dunkirk. Let's take Dunkirk here. 25mm armor all over the place. The entire ship is clad in 25mm armor. So a Cleveland without IFHE will deal very little damage to this one, whereas one with IFHE will absolutely melt the Dunkirk. So this is of course useful information, and you can look through these ships and you can see these values. So you see 25mm, you calculate your own penetration, so you can already see which values you will be penetrating or on which values you will be benefiting from this. So of course, ships that on which I highly recommend using this is of course especially the 150 to 155mm guns. There are some exceptions, for example Atlanta 127. You go from 21mm of penetration to 27, which allows you to overmatch or well penetrate 25mm armor, which is very useful. But here of course even the Bismarck bow you can penetrate with Cleveland using IFHE. And the Mogami is of course another ship. Highly recommend IFHE on the ship, 155mm guns. Other examples are Kutuzov. Once again, 152mm guns. You can do the math for you can, well, it's the same caliber, so you already know the HE penetration. Belfast, 152, once again the same thing. As said before, the speed, all these ships have different shell velocities, it doesn't matter. Kutuzov shoots shells much faster than the Cleveland, it doesn't matter. They have the same caliber, so their HE penetration is exactly the same. Now then, let's move on to something that I've recently seen and recommended for some god knows why reason. We have my Des Moines with my default captain, no IFHE. And let's show off an example in a training room of fighting some opponents you might face in the Des Moines. Now starting right off, we can just start by calculating the HE penetration value of the Des Moines. Much like many other cruisers, it has 203mm guns. Now, once again, the fact that US AP has great penetration has nothing to do with the HE at all. We already know exactly what the HE penetration on this ship is, so we can easily just count. We know that the 203mm caliber, we split it in 6 once again, and we end up with 34mm of penetration. Now, the reason this is a bit of a magic number is, of course, that pretty much all the bow armors in this game are 32mm. In fact, a lot of the armors in the game are 32mm. So as you can see, all these ships, all these different battleships you might end up facing in the Des Moines, well, their bows are just, well, they're paper to you. I mean, you get the full penetration every time. Keep in mind the damage numbers, by the way, because I will be speccing this ship to IFHE later, and you can see of course that IFHE has actually no impact on the damage, because why would it? HE has a exact number it deals. The only thing that reduces it is the thickness of the armor which you hit, so that's not going to be changed. IFHE is not going to be changing that. So here of course we see the problem with trying to spec IFHE on the Des Moines is that you're already penetrating pretty much all the things you want to penetrate. But that's not really the fundamental issue of attempting to spec IFHE on this, but it's mostly the fact that, well, things that you can't penetrate, you still can't penetrate, or things that you would actually really want to penetrate, you still can't reach with the help of IFHE. So let's go spec IFHE on this guy real quick. Oh god, this actually hurts to do, but whatever. I'm gonna use Elite Captain XP. I don't want to waste the balloons on this because, well, I've already tested this in the past, but I didn't think to record it because I honestly didn't think anyone would ever recommend actually using IFHE, but whatever. I'm not just gonna use 10 points because I'm gonna respec out of this right after this commentary, and now we have IFHE, so let's head back into the training room. And we're back facing the very same foes we fought earlier, and absolutely nothing has changed. The bows, which were exactly the same thickness as before, well, nothing has changed, that's the thing. Well, something has changed. Our fire chance is 3% lower, and we have used a bunch of Elite Captain XP on a perk we don't really need or have any use of. But damage-wise, you might see, I asked you to pay attention to the damage numbers, because as you might see, the damage numbers are exactly identical. I ran around testing it on a bunch of different things that you could penetrate, and there's really no difference at all, which is of course exactly how it's supposed to be. IFHE doesn't increase your damage in any way. All it does is give you 30% HE penetration, which is exactly how it's supposed to work. So the surfaces or these guys that you could penetrate before, you can penetrate now and you deal the same damage, and there are no changes. Things you couldn't really penetrate before, well, you still can't penetrate. Like all these guys, like there's no change. This is exactly how it's supposed to work. You deal the same damage as you did before, and the game everything is working as intended. So what can you actually penetrate by speccing into IFHE on the Des Moines or any ship with 203mm guns? Well, the answer is simple. With the Des Moines there's only 3 ships you can face. On the Montana, well, it's the deck. 38mm deck. Of course, it doesn't extend to the bow or the stern. You can already penetrate those without IFHE. But of course, the issue is here that you're going to be shooting the superstructure. So basically, the shells that you miss, the shells that doesn't hit the superstructure but instead hits the deck, instead of shattering with IFHE, they will deal damage. And this, of course, repeats itself on the Missouri, the Iowa, and even the North Carolina and Alabama. They both have 37mm decks. So once again, you are gaining that benefit. Of course, the majority of the deck doesn't actually benefit from IFHE, since the bow and the stern both have 32mm. So it's really only the area around the superstructure, and considering you're already shooting the superstructure, which will of course be easily penetrated because it's so thin, the actual benefits of IFHE are incredibly small. And considering, well, I mean, you're losing fire chance and you're paying 4 captain perks for this. It's the area, and it's 3 specific or a few specific ships and a very specific area that benefits from it, and it's simply not worth speccing into this at all. It's a waste of captain points. I don't care about feels. I know certain people have been saying that it feels better, but that's just nonsense. I mean, I'm sorry, I can't put it in any nicer way. That's just absolute nonsense. I've tested this, I've played this so much, I know for a fact that it's just don't do it. I disagree. I strongly recommend you avoid speccing into that stuff. The fundamental issue with speccing into IFHE is really that you don't gain enough penetration, because once again, putting IFHE on, you gain 44mm penetration, and that's not enough, because look at this, 50mm, it's 50mm on these massive Grosse Kurfürst decks, it's 50mm on the Yamato. So either you're not penetrating with or without IFHE, or you're already capable of penetrating it with or without IFHE. For example, Zhao and Hindenburg, they have 30mm, so you can already penetrate it without IFHE. Like 30mm, you can already penetrate this without having IFHE. So basically it doesn't give you enough of a benefit to justify using it ever. So the ships that you want to be using it on are pretty much any, or where I can consider it somewhat valuable, is pretty much any ship between 127 and 180mm. Anything else is just fairly pointless. but within those calibers it can be very, very strong. And as usual, whenever I make a ship commentary, if you look it up on my YouTube, you will find which ships I recommended on specifically. Anyway, that was all from me. I hope you guys got something out of this. I'll talk to you later.